So good evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome. Today is May 9th, 2023. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Phil Centonze, the program chair for Section 1510 in Southeast Florida. If you're not already a member of our LinkedIn group, please join and to keep up to date on events that are happening within the section. You'll find the LinkedIn group under the name ASQ Southeast Florida Section 1510. Okay, this live event is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded later, as usual, to our 1510 YouTube channel with the link to the slides that we'll be showing here. Although most of this presentation will not be a slide presentation, it'll be the panel discussion, but there's still some intro slides here that you will have access to. Also, for those of you online who registered online, you should have gotten or had access to a copy of the Sterling resource guide. It should have been in the return email that you got after you actually registered. And so anybody who's here live who wants that electronic version, let me know. I'll send it to you. I'll give you the link. We do have some hard copies back there on the table that you can take until they're gone. So if you want those. For those of you who are participating in the meeting, whether online or here in person, you will receive an email verifying your recertification units for tonight. Now we'd like to introduce Brien, who's the chair of our section. And Kara, I know you have a few words that you'd like to impart to the rest of the members.
Thank you, Phil. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. We have two new announcements. The first is that we are revamping our website, MyASQ. If you go on it right now, it may look a little odd, but beginning next week, you should be able to pull all your RU credits and see upcoming news. The second is the announcement that we have our student scholarship active. The link will go out next week. This year, we are awarding 2 students, whether you're an ASQ 1510 member or not, $2,000. Details will go out next week. There'll be a form that you can apply on. It's in the spirit of quality. So we'll be asking you to write an essay among a couple other things about what quality means to you. And again, that's $2,000 for 2 students. Details will go out next week. With that, I'd like to introduce just a special guest. You may remember her from earlier this year, April Frank.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Phil. I'm April Frank, and I did do a presentation a few months back on emotional intelligence and leadership effectiveness. And I want to announce that we are having a live facilitation hosted at Ryder Corporation in Miami starting in June. And we haven't done this since before COVID. So if you would like to see how you can improve your leadership effectiveness, your capacity for influence, resilience, managing and leading change effectively, come and enroll in this workshop. There are 2 options for enrollment. You can find the information on the chapter. There is a post on the local section website, or you can go to Get Coherent. That's our website, GetCoherent.com, and find the information. It's an excellent opportunity to really learn practical tools to apply day to day and find much more effectiveness in your work relationships and influence. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Okay, well, thank you both. So I want to introduce our panel speakers this evening. One you just met, Kara. Kara Brien is the founder of Lean Elevation. Kara is a management consultant for Lean Elevation, LLC, which is a process improvement company. She helps businesses understand current state and utilize Lean Six Sigma and Agile project management methodologies to facilitate continuous improvement projects. Kara holds an MBA in process improvement from Southeastern University, is an ASQ Six Sigma Black Belt, and serves as the chair of our section, as you've already heard. New to 2022, Kara served as an examiner for the Sterling Council. She served in the examination team. She served as an operations category lead for an applicant organization, an award applicant. When not working, Kara actively participates in Keep America Beautiful and Feeding America, helping clean up and feed her local community. Welcome, Kara. And I also would like to introduce Dr. Steve Kramer. who's associate professor of decision sciences at the Huizenga School of Business, Nova Southeastern University. Professor Kramer leads the unique process improvement MBA concentration at Nova and teaches undergraduate operations management. Steve holds a BS and a MS in industrial engineering and has a PhD in business and management. Steve is a fellow and was certified by the American Society for Quality as a Six Sigma Master Black Belt. He has facilitated and mentored more than 200 Lean Six Sigma projects, Lean Six Sigma process improvement projects. He's applied process planning and improvement techniques in a variety of environments via his active consulting in areas including healthcare, engineering, manufacturing, government operations, financial services, and education. He is published in and about process management issues. In 2022, he was trained as a Sterling examiner as well and participated on an evaluation team for one of the applicants for the award. Before entering academia, Steve worked in aerospace and defense for 20 years as a sector integration and process improvements manager. He's a student advocate and has been the counsel of the student branch of the Southeast Florida chapter of ASQ since facilitating the creation and the charter of that chapter in 2014. He's held several chapter leadership positions since. So welcome, Steve. So just a few slides, just to intro Sterling. For those of you who may not be familiar with Sterling, what I want to try to do tonight is help you understand some of the basics of the Sterling framework. We want to be able to hear from examiners. We want to hear about the ins and outs of the Sterling examiner's role, especially want to hear what's the payback to an examiner for being part of the examiner for examiners for Sterling. So this is the Sterling framework. You can see it's a perspective look at an organization. It's not this diagram. You got the organizational profile, which describes a company, describes an organization, all the key elements of that organization. Things like what the customer group, what kind of customer, what are the customer requirements, what kind of regulatory environment does the organization work within, what's the workforce description, and many other things that are important to the organization. Every organizational profile is different, as you can imagine, for each company, whether you be in the same industry as the company next door, but you've got 5 employees and the company next door has 500, totally different. Things that are important to the 5-person company are going to be totally different from what's important to a 500-person. See the dark blue or those purple boxes, those are the category criteria categories. On the left-hand side, what we call leadership strategy and customers. Left-hand side is what we call the leadership triad or the leadership driver of an organization. On the right-hand side, you see workforce operations and results. That's the results driver of an organization. On the leadership side, leaders understand what customers want at a high level and then develop strategy to accomplish that, to meet customer needs and expectations. And then you've got workforce and operations on the other side that are the execution. Those groups, those categories talk about the execution of strategy and how does a company become successful over the long term. And then results, of course, is the result of what things that are being done. Is it effective? If you're doing the process and the systems in place, are they effective? And then you see part of the foundation here, measurement analysis and knowledge management. That's the knowledge of an organization that comes through data, comes through learning at multiple levels, learning at the individual level, at the process level, and at the organization level. All that learning, how do you embed that into an organization? In the middle, you see integration because everything's connected. Whether if there's a strategy or if there's a challenge, a strategic challenge that a company is facing, for instance, one that we've heard a lot lately, is the workforce, talent acquisition or skills acquisition has been very difficult for many organizations for the past couple of years. Well, if that's true, and that's a challenge, that means that everywhere else in that organization, there should be processes that support any kind of mitigation of that challenge. For instance, in the workforce area, the processes that you use for hiring and recruiting and hiring and onboarding people and upskilling and training, those are all related to that challenge, and they should all be tied together. They should all be aligned and working in the same direction. And then at the bottom, you see the core values and concepts. That's the real foundation of this framework. The core values and concepts are really the foundation, and essentially the criteria are designed to determine the degree to which these characteristics, behaviors of an organization are embedded in that organization. So you see the things that are on here very, very obviously they're important. Systems perspective, customer excellence, focus on success, ethics, transparency, and so on. All these. All this information, by the way, the framework and these core values you'll find in that resource guide that I mentioned earlier, whether in the hard copy or the electronic, they're identical. When an evaluation is done, and we're looking, essentially what we're looking for in an evaluation is, are there processes and are there systems in place? Processes and systems are important because they have momentum, and people can come and go, but if the process is a stabilized, standardized process, it can continue to operate at a successful level, even though people come and go. The people who are involved in that process will be different. They'll have different skills, different abilities, but the process itself embeds learning from past employees, past people who are in that process, and so the process becomes smarter. And as we look at a process, we're looking, as an examiner, as you look at the process, you're looking for these four dimensions. The approach is the actual process of the system. It's how things are done. What are the steps? What are the methods used to carry out the work? It's got to be repeatable, it's got to be measurable, and so on. If there's no approach, the other three really don't make any difference. They're moot. If there's no approach, it doesn't matter. You can't deploy a process that doesn't exist. You can't learn from a process that doesn't exist. And then if you have that approach, you're looking at deployment, learning, integration, and in any order, they're not in the priority order of any kind. Have very strong deployment, weak learning, weak integration. And how well used is that process system? Is it in place and being used in the places where it should be? Learning, again, I mentioned this earlier when I talked about that knowledge management and measurement and data analysis category. But it's, how do you learn from your processes, from your systems, and how do you teach that learning and bring it back in so the process becomes better, becomes smarter, in my words. And then integration, I mentioned that on the other diagram. It's the alignment of processes. How well aligned are your process systems with what's appropriate and what's what's important to you? Again, the importance as developed in the organizational profile. Examiner training usually begins about in August. The applications are due. I think called application of intent is due August 1st. If you're interested in becoming an examiner, and then there's training. For a examiner, there's 5 days of training. 1 day in the August-September timeframe, the other in the September-October timeframe, 3 days at the end of October, early November timeframe. And so those 5 days, and this happens to every examiner, whether you're a new examiner or a repeat examiner. You're coming back, even if you're an examiner for 5, 8 years, you're still going to go through examiner training. You may not have to do those first 2 days because those are very, very basic understanding of criteria and understanding of how to evaluate an application. But the 3-day training that happens in October, November timeframe is important for every examiner to go through every year. There's homework that goes with that. It's part of an evaluation of a case study. But then once the training is done, and this happens in the fall, after the 3-day training, you'll be assigned to a team, and you'll be given the application from a real organization, and you'll go through what's called independent evaluation. I'm not going to get into the details of what we do in all these things, but as you can tell, independent evaluation basically, we're evaluating that application independently from the rest of you. And that's where the team comes in. After that's done, you'll be a category lead. You may be, as Carol was, the operations category lead in her evaluation, and you'll collect everybody's operations, evaluation, independent evaluation, and you'll kind of meld it all into a single consensus draft of what you think, what you and your team thinks about that organization relative to that category. And through that period and going into site visit, there are a number of phone calls that the examiners will have with the organization, the actual organization, for the actual to the site visit. And that'll be to really work out a lot of the details about the process, about results, about all different aspects, about those four elements I talked about, the approach, deployment, learning, and integration. Be looking at all of those as you go through until you get to the final site visit, the last few days, where you're clearing up, all those things that you still have questions about, things that have not been answered on the phone calls, and have not been answered through the application or other parts of that evaluation. So that's in a nutshell. That's the basics about Sterling and the Sterling examiner role. You can, as I said, you can apply to be an examiner. If you go to the website now, it's still got the old application in there because the new one comes out around the time of the conference, the annual conference, which is the week of Memorial Day. So I think 29th, that week is when the new application process and all the dates and the training schedule will be on the website. But you just go to here and look under. Any questions on that? Karen, come on up.
What's the time commitment for an exam?
What's the time commitment?
Overall time commitment.
Good question. Why don't we let, I can give you an answer, but let's hear from this year's experience what that's like. In fact, maybe you want to answer that right off the bat. I'm sure that please. One thing about Sterling versus college. College has been until now, but it has been really a more focused type of program. Where Sterling, throughout its life, has continuously developed medical not just for examiners, volunteers, participating in examiners, but also for the organization. Some other levels of assessments, things that can be done by an organization to get within their Sterling process, is still getting what I consider the most valuable part of any evaluation. And that's very useful to the organizations.
The other thing was, Phil mentioned that the ADLI approach, it really provides degrees of how the organization is doing. Previously you have approach, okay, they're doing this, it's great. Well, how well deployed is it throughout the organization? I mean, if you're doing it with your core processes, are you doing it with your support processes? I mean, is IT doing PDCA projects? Tell me how deep this goes. Even the janitor department, custodians, how deep does it go? And it really provides that level of depth on how well, at least in this instance, for operations, continuous improvement was involved in the company and the organization.
And the surgeons are very helpful. Start with approach. How do you do what you do? Tell me, and then tell me where you do it. What's the extent? And then the good thing is, because sometimes you can think about this, so what about the learning? So what? So you've done it. What have you learned from this? Have you do anything differently now? What are some of the results you've seen, and what have you done with those results? How have you leveraged those results to what end? Do those results help you toward any of your strategic needs or objectives? So those are very helpful. So it's definitely a maturity, as sort of implies. But I think that it's a nice clear rubric structure that you can apply and across very easily. So I
Absolutely, to the learning, in one organization, you're collecting all this customer data. Okay, but what if you change because of this customer data? Well, we're collecting the data. Well, let's get this a little more mature and see what we can do about it. There's your opportunity for improvement. So it really gives a proper framework and really just a roadmap on how they can improve. So you showed the booklet. There's a link to it. If you're here in the room, you have it. You can actually see the rubric. 0 to 100%. How do I get to 100%? You can start to see the language and multiples, how you can do it.
Yeah, each level of scoring, there'll be 4 statements on the rubric, and the first statement will relate to approach, the second will relate to deployment, third to learning, fourth to integration. So as you score the organization, you're looking for the best fit. What level is it? Is it in the 10 to 20 or 10 to 15? I forgot what the first level is, because there's very few companies that are at that level. Or is it in the 70 to 85 and so on, everything in between. So what has your perspective on organizations and organizational behavior changed at all by having the the foundation of an understanding of the Sterling criteria and the framework?
Yes and no. So for mine, I tend to go, I work in consulting, I go into a company that usually say we need to become more efficient, we need problem solving. But a lot of times they only want you to speak to C-suite or, a tier 1 or 2 below that. They don't want you to talk to the frontline workers, whatever it may be. So it's always been this challenge of communicating with them. Well, what is your frontline employee saying? By showing this criteria and the different levels that you can be speaking at, it provides some evidence to say, well, this is what best practice is doing. So it opens the door to a new conversation because I'm working with them because they're starting to care about quality. They're new to quality. Well, here's the benchmark for quality. They're doing this. Let's talk about how you can get to that level.
It's interesting because I think the best thing, and what Phil was saying, this is really formative, really trying to help them. And so we struggled as a team with coming up with what we would consider very good OFIs, opportunities for improvement, because that's the strengths. If I tell you what's strong, that's not really helping. That's a validation, a pat on the back that gets your ego going. So yeah, but so let's let the other foot drop. So having these we struggle sometimes, but you have to find opportunities within each type of category, within each type of application area you're assessing, because that's your job, I think, is to try and help them get better. So yeah, this may be good, this may be great, but tell us where, from an examiner point of view, tell me the things or the possibilities, or what could we do better for? So for instance, the benchmark, how do you know you're the best? How do you know you're on track? You've been learning, but compared to what? So we found in some cases where the organization was looking within itself, comparing within itself, and said, we're great. I'm saying, yeah, but did you ever look outside the organization? Okay, so we don't come in with solutions. We don't say, hey, you're not doing it this way. This is an established best practice. No, that's not our job. Our job is to challenge them to say, do you know what the best practice is? And how do you keep up with best practice? And then how do you train your employee, blah, blah, blah. So it's how do you understand the need to be accountable for cloud performance, where you find it, and you track it, because always moves around.
Yeah, and it's that point, as you work with organizations, you see that the least developed ones find it extremely difficult to find comparison measures, benchmarks out there to be able to compare, to see, how good is good. They're looking internally, they're looking back a few years, so they're looking at a trend that way to see if there's been an improvement. But and then the next thing, as they start to evolve, they look at similar kinds of organizations. And it's usually difficult, especially in the commercial world, it's difficult to get data and information from your competitors. I mean, who else is similar to you? Well, it's your competitors. It's very difficult to get that. And so as they continue to develop, they start to understand that, well, we've got a process that does this. Outside our industry, there's that company that has a process that does something similar, that we may be able to use as a comparison and as a benchmark to look at. We don't have to stick to, if I'm a manufacturer of pencils, I don't have to look for another manufacturer of pencils to understand how well I'm doing. The process of building a pencil is probably similar to some other kind of process out there, and you can be able to use that. But it is very difficult for organizations to come up with those kinds of measures. I did an evaluation on an organization once that actually I wasn't an evaluator. I was a consultant helping them get through the evaluation. And they're a very good company. I won't mention who they are, but very good company, and they did very well, but they didn't have the comparisons, and as a result, they didn't win the award that year. And they said, well, nobody else does what we do, and it's true. But when they started to look for those similar, and what I call the analogous processes and systems that are out there, they did that, and the following year they came back and won the award. But that is a difficult thing for many companies. So what? Let me stop again. Any questions from in person or the Zoom audience? What's the qualification needed to be an examiner? Well, I think the primary thing is the willingness to go get into something that's new and to learn. That's probably the most important thing, because it would be nice I saw, you saw that list of potential skills that, that you could gain by being an examiner. And, that is very helpful to have that business acumen, to be able to look at an overall organization and see the entire system, but it's not required. You'll learn that as you go through the process, and you'll
tend
get to
be
see
put
that.
in, I think, is supported by your background. So operations, is my background, so I was a natural, I think, for an operations category lead as opposed to financial or HR. Now, I've learned a lot about financial and HR through this, which is great. So, I just, like I said, you have to have like a willingness. Now, I found also interesting is your fellow examiner. I think I was the only one first. You might have 2 first years out of the group. So there's a lot of people who have been doing this for a few years, 3 years, 4 years, 2, 3, 4 years, and then there's some older ones who've been there for longer. But so they actually are more, let's say, literally qualified because they've been through this before. They know what's going on, so they're much more efficient relative to time. Oh my God. I felt myself going, oh, yeah, okay. So first time through, you're going to learn a bunch of stuff about how to get through the process and be like, okay, so the difference between the process falls like this. I'm now more focused. I can attack this thing and not waste as much of my time, not knowing, right? Just either overproducing, right, or over processing, all sorts of waste that we don't really want to do. But I think most of us in the quality have that view, right? We have a systemic view. We look across the organization. We're not too pigeonholed. So we have a process understanding. We have some quant skills and abilities.
One of the things that I've noticed over all these years in seeing examiners, in the process at all levels, from first year to 20 year, is that you gain a very good perspective on the linkages. I talked about integration earlier. Understanding the linkages between a challenge and what you should be doing in HR. Understanding between well, if you're doing that in operations, how is that supported by, by your data and measurement, what are those linkages? What's the connections between the various pieces of an organization? Like I say, I always say everything's connected, and it is in some way. You can find the linkage to almost everything, but going through the examiner training and being an examiner, and actually going and doing site visits. If you're an examiner, if you go through the training, and actually Sterling offers just that training, the examiner training, they call it leadership training. It's more expensive because you're not paying back, so to speak, as a volunteer examiner on a team, but you could go in and learn, and you're still not going to learn as much as a person going through, even in the first year, going actually through an evaluation and having a site visit and, really getting to understand. Optimally, probably, after 3 years as an examiner, you get a really good handle on the criteria. And there's still, I was an examiner for 17 years, and I'm still involved. I'm the lead judge for the Sterling and the Oglethorpe Awards. And I still learn things about the criteria and about organization. I tell a lot of people, I feel like I've earned a couple of degrees in organizational behavior, over that time frame. It really opens your eyes to see, what organizations do, how they react, how they act, and you can almost, you don't want to predict, but you can almost predict how they're going to, what their results are going to be like, based on some of their actions.
And I have to say, I love the team I was working on, and I think this goes for all the teams, but there's such a diversity there, not just in subject matter expertise, you being operations, but I had an SVP on, a senior vice president on my team. She took, or this person rather, sorry, had taken leadership. But there are other things too. Like we had someone who was a customer service rep. They're looking to, they're doing their degree, they're looking to move forward. They're getting this valuable experience. As one example, what is a Gemba walk? Well, maybe someone on the team doesn't know what Gemba walk is. Gemba walk is something that's used in Lean Six Sigma. It's when leadership goes out there and sees how the process is doing. Someone on the team who's familiar with that term can go ahead and just increase their understanding before even taking it into an interview. So we're all there talking about our different experiences and adding this perspective onto it that they may not have had even by themselves. So there's the subject matter expertise, and then there's even the level. Like you said, you're a judge, but we have faster examiners. We have our leaders, but there's also advanced examiners. So I'm just an examiner as a first year, but after the 3 years, I'm advanced. So someone can know to come to me for information. How do I structure my question? What's the best way to ask this? Why did you say that this was an OP as opposed to a string? You can get that level of understanding just because it's so diverse on the team.
One thing I want to mention is the mentorship was just awesome. And it started in the training. We were buddied up with an advanced, at least, examiner. And as we went through our own training homework, we could call this person, and that was awesome. So because you're learning how to think, and that was very helpful to say, okay, I think I looked. Oh no, look at it. Oh, okay. So you get calibrated. So it's really good to not waste a bunch of time because this person's going to be there for you, and they're really good. And then that went right into the examining team, based on the structures. You have the lead for the whole thing, and then you have like their deputy. So there's two highly skilled people there, and then they have others that are. So at any point and then even across the criteria, you may be sort of paired up. So I was paired up with a measurement side of it because it has some similarities to operations. So the two of us work together in some degrees, but underneath like the deputy of the whole thing. And it worked out really nice. So, and because as you're going through this, sometimes you need one-on-one time because we're trying to come down to the end and write up your final recommendations. I don't mean like what you should do. I mean like what would you assess? And so you're trying to get the wording very specific and very helpful and very consistent in voice and all this. And so having people there that can walk you through that, you don't feel like you're just standing out going like, what the hell do I do? So they're very interested in the outcome quality and they're very helpful. So I was just really impressed with the whole team, everyone I met from the Sterling side. And then we also have a Sterling rep who comes in, at least periodically, I would say, to just make sure the process is doing what it's supposed to do, which I think is healthy. Like, I don't call it an audit, but it's more just an oversight.
Right.
Yeah, and that was good too.
Do you expect what you've learned or gained from the process to impact you, or maybe it already has, but to impact you in whether it's in your working career or in your personal life?
It already has impacted me, that's for darn sure. The way I go about consulting is radically different. I actually refer back to the Sterling language when I'm writing up my reports or when I'm talking to C-suite on, just again, opportunities for improvement. Just making that one change makes a huge difference in the way that you speak to people. I can't wait to do it again. Yeah.
And on that point about doing it again, for anybody who wants to join new, I mean, you had an opportunity to. I would like to get back to the question about the impact for Steve, but on how you used how the ASQ Section 1510 helped you with your participation.
Right. So we at 1510, we have a program. It's relatively new. It's called the Member Value Program. And what it is, it's to sponsor our members, whether they're board members, or even student members, if they want to continue their professional development. That could be going to conferences, trainings. In my case, I was sponsored last year for Sterling, and we 100% have this open for next year. So if you are interested in becoming a Sterling examiner and going through the whole process where you serve on a team, let us know. We'll have a link out there. My ASQ, the website's changed a little bit, so we're doing a few updates, but that is 100% out there. You can apply for it if you are a 1510 member.
Okay, thanks, Kara. So Steve, back to the impact on you.
So I mentioned a little bit is the impact on me is I can bring this into the classroom and it will help my students. I've been able to internalize it. Did I learn a lot? Not necessarily, but it gave me different perspectives, just like the tactile versus visual versus auditory, right? So it's just different. But I also love the rubric. I'm a rubric kind of guy, and to be able to have the ADLI approach, learning, deployment, learning, and then integration, that's a nice. And it's not just nice words. There's really explicit language to define those. And that's very helpful too. So when you can, when you've gone from one level of quality to another. So I think that would be helpful. It's at this point in my career, it was good for a rounding thing. Like I said, I think it would be healthy for ASQ to consider Boulder/state examiner stuff as a master black belt. We get credit for that. So it's a portfolio. Same thing with fellow, right? So with fellow, you're supposed to be well-rounded in the college, blah, blah, blah. So having this type of experience, I think would be, and I'm not saying it doesn't, I just don't remember, it's been a while, but in those applications, this is very germane to quality, right? We're trying to help people get better. So it's great for your career. It's aspirational. You may not be ready for it, but you can try and post it. Like, if I were, when could I do this? Okay, again, it takes a chunk of time, but you can work that into your life. It's, we have some capacity. But it's sort of a personal thing where you're headed with it. It needs to have utility. I don't think you can do it just because you feel like it. But it's good also to have your own purpose, right? You have to have your own strategies. What am I trying to get from this? It's not hard to justify, but you really have to internalize it, not only individually, but maybe for your organization. And what do you want to leave as a legacy or impact? It's really, when I worked with the organization I did, these people were thrilled to get the feedback that they were given. They're like, oh, this is awesome. Mm-hmm. Okay. So they're not just competing, I think they really want to get better. And that's an indication of a higher level organization anyway, that they're really interested. But anyway,
If I could just give you a quick look back on the 29 years that I've been, exposed to Sterling, every job that I've had since then, since 1994, including my independent consulting work, has been influenced by Sterling, and it's actually helped me get jobs in some cases, because people were looking for, even more than quality. I had a job as a senior quality assurance manager at a manufacturing company, and it wasn't just the fact that I had a CQA, that got me the job. It also had to do with the Sterling, because the people who interviewed me and the general manager was very interested in that at that time. So it helps all along, and then it gives you that perspective again on organizational behavior that can help you, especially in the independent consulting world, because you work with all kinds of companies at all levels of maturity, and you get to be able to help them, with the things that you can tell them about opportunities for improvement and strengths and other things. So we're getting near the end here. Are there any more questions from the live audience or the Zoom audience?
You said that you were paid for the training. That's it. The service are voluntary, or the training is voluntary? Or?
Yes.
And if you, before COVID, in the pandemic, the site visits were reimbursed, for travel and room and board. So that was the only, that was basically the only other expense that you would have had, but it was reimbursed from the, from the company that went through the process. And just the last question then I'd like to ask is, how many lessons learned as far as the process of being an examiner? What things did you worked for you? What things do you think maybe could still have some opportunity for improvement?
I found that being organized is the best way to go about it. So especially in independent or evaluation, I kind of did like a little tack time. How long is it going to take me? And I figured that it would take me 37.5 hours just to finish the independent evaluation. So we're going through all these we're going through 6 categories. Each of them have like 10 questions each. And of those 10 questions, there's multiples. So the biggest lesson I learned was break that out for each of those little multiples. If they ask about current customers, okay, that's one line item. Are they answering that? Okay, the next line item, we're talking about future customers. This is all one question. Are they answering that? If they miss anything, opportunity for improvement, because it wasn't mentioned. So it is incredibly thorough, and it becomes kind of like a checklist. I can take that same checklist to, a future company. They want me to audit their operations. I just take that same checklist over because I've already made the template.
That was the biggest lesson. I had to do my independent evaluation 3 times because of that, but the final one was great. Yeah, that was a huge lesson to learn.
You have to cut yourself some slack on your own learning. You've got to expect to be horribly inefficient starting out. Oh my God, we're looking at, so they train you with one small section of one category. Okay. But there are 6 categories, each with multiple sections in reality. So then you look back and you say, God, how long did it take me to try and get through this one tiny little thing? And you go, oh my God. So now and that's a problem of trying, that shell shock. But you have to, if you trust the process, you get through it and the learning curve. But that's hard to explain. It maybe could be explained a little bit better in the training. That don't freak out here, because it's going to be hard and it's going to take you much longer. But don't just look at this and say, now this multiply it by 100, because that's what the real thing is. And then you start to say, oh my God, I'm just going to put in a manual here. No. Okay. You would if you stayed at that level, but you're not going to stay at that level. You're going to learn quickly and you're going to be supported and all that. So it's, a lot of time, but it's good. And to the again, to the benefit, or to the and speaking well of the Sterling, they keep looking for their own feedback. So I gave them a few different views of their training. We did some of this before. Why are we doing this again? And that's a waste of time, type of thing. And they're thinking about things. So they're always open for their own improvements, and that's a help.
And all of this is supported with a database, right? In the way that you go through completing. It's, I talked about physical cut and pasting earlier. Well, that doesn't happen anymore, obviously, but there's even an advancement over the last couple of years. It's been in beta, but it supports the work that the examiners do. It takes a lot of time, and honestly, for 16 years of my 17, every year I said I'm never doing this again. but the value to me, I felt, was very high. In networking and just learning about organizations was well worth it to me to spend the time. My wife still tells me, "Why are you still doing this?" and I say, "I really like to do it. I mean, it really is fun." And like I said earlier, I do learn every year. I learn more about organizations and the criteria.
Could potentially have a role model company, and you're getting an inside look into what they're doing and how they got it to work. And in the interviews, you're even finding out where their missteps were. I mean, that experience, I would pay a lot more money for that. Thankfully, I paid my little bit and then I paid it back, but I can see why you did it for 16 years. That's invaluable. Just going into these companies, seeing how it works, it's incredible.
Any last questions? Makes you a more effective consultant, that's right. Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kara.